Well, welcome and thank you once again for joining me at Pastor's Positive Mental Health Institute. I'm just so excited about the interview that we have today. Before we get into that, I would just ask you that you would please like, share, and subscribe. And if you find this beneficial, please let others know. You can also check out the work that I do at ppmhi.org. And if you have any questions, all that contact information will be in the comments section. I can't wait to introduce you to our next guest. You might have noticed about a few months ago, I actually did a two-part review of her book, Faithful and Fractured, which actually was used a lot in my dissertation. So thank you for that work. A lot of her work was used in my dissertation. I had to be careful not to use too much of it. And so I'm just really excited. In fact, Dr. Preoschold-Bell is actually the reason that I am studying and involved in pastors' positive mental health, because I had reached out to her and I was looking at doing something with stress and negative health. And she goes, we all know that already. She goes, let's look at pastors' positive mental health and how those things that we can do to build their positive mental health to combat the negative mental health. And so I'm just so thankful. So Regine, thank you so much for being with me today.
Oh, I'm really delighted to be here. What a fantastic introduction. And I am so glad that you did study positive mental health. And now you have an entire podcast devoted to positive mental health and ministry. It's amazing.
Yeah, what's great too, Regine, just a little side note, one of the reasons I went into this doctoral direction was I kind of wanted to shake up congregations and church members and tell them, hey, you need to take better care of your pastors. But one thing that came out of it was several of the pastors that I interviewed, after going through them, recalling these moments where their personal satisfaction was built up, their pro-social attitude, autonomy, and all the different ones, and interpersonal relationship skills, they felt refreshed. In fact, I had one pastor who was considering quitting before the interview. And then after an hour and a half of talking about these things, he said, I feel so much better now. And so it's really led to a lot of the work that I get to do, seminars that I've been able to do at conferences for pastors and pastors conferences, and even church workers, the professional church workers. It applies to some of that too. And so it's just been really exciting to see how God has used that. And so what I would like for you to do is, I wrote, people hear me enough. I'd love to hear from you. And so if you could kind of tell me, kind of your educational background, your organization. I know you're huge with yeah, Duke Clergy Health Initiative. And so I would just love to hear a lot about what you're doing there. So take it away, please.
That's great. That's really funny. I live in Durham, North Carolina, where Duke University is. It's also where I'm from. And our slogan is "Keep It Dirty, Durham," because we were built up around the railroad line, over 100 years ago, and it was very dusty in Durham. And so anyway, yes, right. The Duke Clergy Health Initiative in Keep It Dirty Durham is where I am located. But yeah, so I was trained as a clinical community psychologist. I don't practice clinically, but I do research, and community psychology is how systems affect individuals. And I love applying that to the world of clergy, and also to other people who I say are servant-hearted, who give their whole self to their work and their occupations. And so I also have some studies of caregivers of orphans around the world and teachers around the world. But right now, the majority of the work of what I do is with United Methodist Clergy in North Carolina. Um, I got the privilege of being invited into this work with the very first grant that the Duke Endowment gave to that founded the Duke Clergy Health Initiative back in 2007. So I came in like month two, and now I'm like, oh my goodness, it's almost 17 years. And to be honest, like in the grant and soft funded world, like you think 5 years is just as good of a grant you can get. And so I never thought I'd be here 17 years later. And it is really exciting to be able to go deep with uh, one population, very caring, important group of people, and to get to learn all the different facets. I currently direct the Duke Clergy Health Initiative. I have not the whole time. I did a lot of research first. I hope we get to talk about a couple of the behavioral trials that I've been able to run with the Duke Clergy Health Initiative. So I definitely want your listeners to know that we not only study clergy, but we actually do interventions and test them to try to come up with tools, resources, practical behavioral suggestions to improve the health and well-being of clergy.
Yeah. So I know that a lot of your work early on went around a lot about health as far as physical health. And then I know that there's been some evolution to your work because that prompted other research and all your, and that's what I love about what you do is you're looking at what you're finding and going, oh, let's move this way. It seems like that way anyway to go, let's kind of study this now. So if you could kind of tell me, which is where I want you to hear about what you're doing and some of your outcomes, kind of what the evolution of the work has been and what you're doing right now.
Well, I tell you, we make mistakes all the time. And like that is actually the beauty of research. People won't always hold it up, but I find where you don't get the results you think you ought to be like to be really interesting. And that has caused us to change multiple times. So I mean, I've had so many surprises over the years. I mean, the first big surprise was just working with clergy and how invested they would be in the first place. Like the very first time we did a survey of the United Methodist clergy in North Carolina, there were about 1,800 of them. I was warned to like, don't make the survey more than 15 minutes. You know, pastors are really busy. And there just wasn't a really good comprehensive well-being survey that looked at mind, body, and spirit. And so I took this great big risk and I made it an hour long. It was online. People weren't really used to engaging online that long back in 2008 when that survey was. And yet 95% of the clergy in North Carolina took that whole survey, which helps us feel really certain about our findings. That then and now, our response rate has dropped somewhat, but it's still so much higher than even gold standard surveys, and that's because clergy care about their own health and well-being, and nobody had been asking. And they also care about each other. So there is this commitment to helping each other flourish in their own work. And they know that sometimes we get to actually propose an intervention, so they might get something out of it. So that was a surprise. I was shocked to find that elevated depressive symptoms were really high for clergy. I did not think that would be the case because well, I mean, clergy have community, they have an education, they have health insurance, including mental health insurance. Copays can be substantial, but they're employed. Like all of these things they're highly educated. All of these things should be really protective. So that was surprising. And then and then we saw high rates of chronic diseases, hypertension, diabetes, asthma, arthritis, some things that are like linked with stress, as arthritis and things can be. And so our very first intervention, called the Spirited Life, took on both physical health and depression symptoms. And we also, I mean, I don't know why I thought we could do all of this. We also were trying to reduce stress all at the same time. And we did this massive two-year program, monthly health coaching, 3 retreats that were multiple days, taught specific content. We even gave each pastor $500 halfway through to keep them engaged and to let them spend it on like any kind of health intervention that they wanted. And I was throwing everything at it because at the time there weren't even good ways to lose weight. Like there were ways to lose weight but not keep it off. So we thought, okay, lots of resources. Let's see what happens here. And so one thing that was amazing is clergy really engaged. high levels. Not only did they sign up, we ended up serving 1,200 clergy of those 1,800 over for a 2-year intervention, and they really participated in all the aspects. We saw fantastic drops in chronic disease indicators. So reverses of hypertension and diabetes. Overall, we were looking at metabolic syndrome, which is the cluster of those together. Pastors lost a lot of weight. And then we looked at their weight loss 18 months later, and some, on average, pastors returned to their baseline weight, but weren't getting heavier, which most of us in America are getting heavier all the time. So that was a success. And then pastors who started, who were the heaviest, they continued to lose weight throughout. And so, in case any of your listeners are interested, the program, well, I can't quite tease apart all the aspects that we tested. We were testing a program called Naturally Slim, which is now marketed as Wonder Health, WONDR, no E, I don't know why, Wonder Health, and it's 10 sessions online. And so we're still recommending that. I know I'm talking a lot. I'll just say
Great.
we were not able to lower depression on average, nor stress. In fact, we found out we weren't even measuring stress right. The stress measures for the most common stress measure out there, the perceived stress scale, has 8 of the 10 questions on it don't even make sense to clergy. Like they're things like how can you, oh my gosh, what's the one I usually hold up? The one that works is how on top of it do you feel? Like that's okay. But like there's one question, how often do you feel like things are going your way? And clergy are like, it's not about my way.
Right.
Yeah, so let me pause just because everyone's hearing so much from me, but I will say we ended up having to really change based on the depression and stress findings there.
Well, don't feel bad about going on and on because that's really what this is for, is to, I've been interviewing pastors, professional church workers, marriage and family therapists who have dealt with pastors. I have Dr. Greg Walton from Grace Place Wellness, which is part of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, which is what I'm part of. And the conference I was just at last week was about 3,000 lay leaders, church workers, and pastors. And a lot of what you're saying is, I kind of feel like we're getting to where the United Methodists, where your work has kind of been trailblazing for a lot of the other denominations, because you're speaking to me. I'm treated for hypertension, I'm treated for diabetes, and on a path to lose weight. And the challenges that we have is that 75% in our denomination, anyway, of clergy are considered obese. And we're just starting now. In fact, our Synod convention in July, one of the resolutions we passed was to be more proactive in the mental health care of church workers. And so it's kind of good timing to kind of see how do we do this. And because, all the things that you mentioned impact the mental health. The stress and the hypertension and the diabetes, the overall health. And being a pastor myself, one of the things that we struggle with is taking time to take care of self. And so I always share that I like to golf a lot. So during the summer, I get out on the golf course like 6 a.m. and I can be in the office by 8:30, 9 o'clock. But then the time starts changing and I can't get on the golf course as early. And so I don't show up to the office till 9:45 or so, even though I don't have an appointment or anything scheduled. And I feel guilty about that. And so I'm really trying to move from, for the mind of the pastor, from self-care, because we struggle with that, right? We got to deny ourselves, it's not about you, and to steward care, because we would look at our congregations as God's given them us to steward them. And so how do we steward ourselves so that we can be better stewards of the congregation? And so, in fact, Dr. Chris Adams and I in a recent podcast talked about that a little bit too. And so again, between you and Dr. Adams, I'm just so blessed to have you guys even entertain a conversation with me, because I really feel that the work both of you are doing is just just phenomenal and much needed. And so thank you for that. So what are some of the things you're doing right now that I know in emails you were kind of excited about, and some things that you're trying out right now that you want people to know about?
Oh, good. Oh, good. Well, before I tell you, let me just comment on I love it that you're golfing, that you found something. Like, one of the key things about physical activity is you have to enjoy it. And so just keep playing around until you find something that you enjoy. And I bet your whole day goes better
Oh,
once you've been out there like that. I I One of the things that we learned early on with Spirited Life is that you have to give pastors a lot of permission. Like, clergy need permission to tend to whatever aspect of their life it is over and over again. And the fact that your work could happen at any time of the day or night, and that by definition you're working on the weekend, and like there isn't that structure, so you have to give yourself permission to care for yourself. I learned this the hard way. Like, I personally was working way too hard, writing grants late at night, like all kinds of things. I didn't get enough sleep, and sleep is so essential to repair our cells. I'll never exactly know why, but I ended up with breast cancer 9 years ago. I'm fine. I'm fine now. I'm really, really healthy now. But it was a very tough lesson learned that I wasn't caring for myself. And and that year, I had 94 doctor's appointments. Whole long story. But what I learned is that my team did a lot of good work without me, and that actually I'm not as essential in all the ways that you might think that we need to be. And I'm not a theologian at all, but from spending time with some really great people, Chris Adams included, like, we we need to be more humble than that. Like, God is going to get God's plan with or without us. Like, we hope to be part of that plan, but it is going to go that way. And so it is possible to step back and care for yourself. And in fact, that's really going to be very helpful to you and everyone else. In fact, what I really love studying positive emotions and what they do. And for at least 20 years now, there's been this groundbreaking research by Barbara Fredrickson at the University of North Carolina on positive emotions. And there is each emotion that we have is linked with an action tendency. So if you get angry, you're given, like, the action tendency is to, fight or flee. Like, there's like a that I mean, that also happens with fear, but with anger, you're given the energy to try and do something about it, to take back whatever violation you've occurred. But positive emotions also have these action states. And so when you experience awe and wonder, it opens your mind up to seeing the world in new ways. It's not the same thing as like running, but it does it changes where you are. When you feel content, you are more likely to just sit there and and take it all in. What else do we have? When you have joy, you're more likely to want to share with other people. It makes you more social. And so if you allow yourself to do some of the things that you find joyful and life-giving, you will actually show up as a better clergy person, or family member or friend. Any way that you're walking in this world, it will be good for you.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because the WHO in as early as 2000, late as 2006, pretty much said you couldn't have positive and negative emotions at the same time in a person. And so some of the challenges with that is that now in 2021, they came out and said, oh, you can. In 2001, they were saying to be mentally healthy, you had to be you couldn't have any negative emotion. You couldn't have stress or depression or anxiety and be healthy, mentally healthy. And so what they're discovering, which is a lot of, I know what you're kind of saying, is if we can have those positive emotions built up, the negative emotions are resisted a little bit more. They're a little bit lower. Not that you're going to get rid of them completely, but it helps combat them in a really positive way that helps. I mean, every pastor and clergy member wants to run the race well and with joy. And the expectation of all of us and in the ministry is that we would be happy and joyful all the time, right? And so the challenge is how can we be real with people? And then how can we also have people and programs in place like you are talking about that help you take the time, give yourself permission to dwell upon those relationships that actually do build you up. God's given us the church and the body of Christ together to grow and build one another up in love. And sometimes as pastors, we don't include ourselves in that. So anyway.
Oh, I love what you're talking about. Okay, yeah, it's this, you can't be happy all the time.
Right.
You literally can't. If we were happy all the time, you wouldn't, it would become just your natural state and you wouldn't recognize when you are happy or when something good happens. So biologically, we can't just stay in a happy zone. You can maybe stay in a neutral zone if your life is going pretty well. You can stay neutral and that way you can pick up on the signal when something good happens or when something bad happens. And they've done studies of like people trying to chase happiness. And if you just chase a life of pleasure and the things that you enjoy, it actually doesn't work. People don't end up being happy in the long term that way, and you can't sustain in those emotions for long. So what works much better, and actually like one of my favorite definitions of positive mental health is where you do have a strong dose of positive emotions every day. It's not all day, but like on and off as your day goes on. And you have to have good psychological functioning and good social functioning. And so the psychological functioning are things like you have meaning in your life. And we all know when you try to bring in meaning and make a difference in this world, there's going to be struggle in that. And that's certainly what clergy have signed up for
Yeah.
and are so you're going to have struggle with the meaning. Um, Positive mental health also comes with like warm and trusting relationships, feeling like you're learning and growing as a person. And then also socially, it's that you feel like you're part of a community and that you're making a difference in the world. And so when you take that whole definition with the positive emotions and both how you're doing as an individual with meaning and your social life, like 2/3 of the definition is the way we are in relationship with others and how we're choosing to spend our time. And it's not all about chasing those positive emotions.
Well, yeah, and that's why my study was how pastors describe the way their positive mental health is influenced by the actions of church members. So that's all relational, right? You're looking at relation and going, how are, and it's really because I created a tool for pastors, better served if they go through one of my seminars and whatnot. But that really gives them the ability to reflect and go, okay, how is someone, and so like when I interview pastors in this podcast, the last question I ask is, how has someone made you smile in the last 2 weeks in your church? Just a simple thing, because we get very caught up. As you said, we lead with our heart. It's a sacred calling. And so when things aren't working right, we perseverate on that and we focus more on the negative things that are happening. And we're very insecure as people. And so if someone doesn't even say hi to us at church service, it could be nothing to do with us. We feel we think about that the rest of the week, and so we have to train ourselves to say, wait, what are people doing, and be specific with certain areas of the, I use the positive mental health scale that Luch did in 99, but just what are people doing specifically that build my autonomy, my problem solving, my interpersonal, how can I be friends with somebody? What makes me want to socialize with them? How am I affirmed, encouraged, and specific gratitude? So I don't want to get into all my work because people can look that up. But what are some characteristics? I think this is going to speak to what you've been doing lately, I hope, but what are some characteristics you're discovering that contribute to pastor longevity?
Yeah. All right. Wow. Okay. So we just finished a paper and it just came out in Social Science and Medicine. And this was led by Jane Lee and Anna Holloman. And they, we were able to look at the mental health profiles of United Methodist clergy in North Carolina from 2014 to 2019, because people take our surveys about every 2 years. And 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 using Latham class analysis, we were able to say, okay, what profiles make sense? Are there different profiles of mental health? And so in that, we looked at both kind of negative aspects of mental health, like depression and anxiety symptoms and burnout, and positive aspects, like a positive mental health measure, as well as feelings of personal accomplishment, which is kind of, if you don't have that, you're headed toward burnout. So it's
Right.
like the flip side of burnout. And we found four different profiles. We expected to find flourishing clergy, and we did. So there are people who are doing well, where you'd want to be on all of those. And then we found distressed clergy, so clergy who weren't doing well on any of those, who like had depression and anxiety symptoms that would go across a threshold that researchers suggest that they should go see a professional. Um, and then we found these two in between groups, which I find really interesting. And one was people who were languishing. So they weren't, um, they didn't already have high levels of depression and anxiety symptoms that would go across a researcher threshold, but they did, it was below that, but it wasn't great. But they didn't have the positive things in their lives. They didn't have the positive emotions, the meaning, the feeling like they belonged and were making a difference. So they were just hanging out, languishing. And then there was another group, which we called the burdened but fulfilled group. So this group looked really great on all the positive mental health and personal accomplishment measures, and they looked kind of not great on anxiety and depression symptoms and burnout. Like it was creeping up, moderate levels,
Yeah.
burdened but fulfilled. And then we got to look at what happened after the pandemic. So people would have this profile for like 6 years before the pandemic, and then what happened between 2019 and 2021. All right. So, we really suspected that clergy who'd been distressed would stay distressed, and that was true.
Mhm.
But what I didn't know was if you were flourishing before the pandemic, would that be strong enough to keep you flourishing in the face of everything that was going on in the pandemic? And it did.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So one thing that we know is that flourishing and for clergy in particular, that having flourishing mental health can be very protective, like in the most extreme circumstances. So that's the good news. The bad news is that a lot of people who are languishing transitioned into a distressed state, and a lot of the clergy who were in that burdened but fulfilled group also transitioned to languishing or distressed.
Mhm.
So it's not enough to have high positive mental health and ignore depression and anxiety and burnout symptoms. Like when you start to get those signals, it's really important as clergy to work on those.
Mm. Yeah, and that's really where my work focuses is preventative. I talk to a lot of guys who are into, like Shepherd's Canyon is a retreat center that we offer in our synod, and all, United Methodist, everyone has these places where guys who are burnout and clergy who's burnout can go to, right? And so we went on talking to them. They're like, well, so what? I said, no, if someone's burnout, I send them to somebody else. I said, I can't help that. But once they get, kind of restored again, then we can start putting some of what I have worked on into practice, because I'm not a clinician. I just have these observations and these things that we've discovered hold true for pastors and clergy, that they can do. But really, if they're in the middle of like you said, lack of personal accomplishment, depersonalization, or just emotional exhaustion, it's really hard to see through that to these other things. And you mentioned COVID, which we one day we're not going to talk about it anymore. I hope. I don't know, but it seems to not be going away. But it was one of these things that everyone experienced together. It wasn't a regional thing, and so it has a little bit more of a lasting impact than I think some of us even thought it would. But do you find, and you might not be able to answer this, but something that Dr. Chris Adams and I were talking about, and I'm continuing to kind of just watching these podcasts, is that it seems to be that those who grew up in the church and kind of felt that calling at a young age and had a support system of church members around them that encouraged that calling seem to have done better, and are doing better in ministry than those who say came to faith late in life and then decided shortly after there, I'm going to go into the ministry. It seems that those people, we don't have any official, I know that he's studying it right now, but it's just an interesting observation that I would say that holds true. I grew up in the church, and so church dynamics, no matter what I've been in 3 different denominations, no matter what denomination, church dynamics are the same, and they don't surprise me. Where, coming in bright-eyed, I love Jesus and I want to go serve him, and you come in and you realize some of these things. I don't know if you can speak to that, but I wonder if you've seen any of that with how the clergy call in someone's life was developed, if it impacts how they do in ministry.
Oh yes. So on our team we have Glenn Milstein from City University of New York, and Todd Ferguson at Baylor University, and they are I hope I have that right for Todd. He just switched. But they have a paper. We do ask in our survey, did they grow up with a particular religion or faith, um and what was it, and kind of when did they switch? And they are finding that it is beneficial to your I think your occupational satisfaction and some of your mental health symptoms if you are. I only study United Methodist, so if you're a United Methodist and you grew up that way, they are finding some that it appears that is correlated with the benefit. Now, I will say I was surprised that there's a fairly substantial percentage of people who go on to become clergy who weren't raised necessarily with any faith, and then who switched to be United Methodist. So that was kind of a surprise. I think we have more to learn there.
Yeah.
I hope Chris Adams and others, the Flourishing in Ministry study, they have these great in-depth interviews with your call stories, and that your call story probably matters, and it changes over time based on how you're feeling about your ministry now, and the need for women clergy to have exemplars of other women clergy. Manuela Castiglione is finding that. But I would say anybody who has chosen to be clergy to take heart in that, and that the effect of having grown up or not grown up in the church isn't probably as large as other things that you have control over.
No,
Let me tell you some of the things you have control over. Is that all right?
what's that?
Can I tell you some of the things
Oh yeah,
that,
please.
so one study that we did that I'm really proud of, and that pastors still talk about and use, is we did a flourishing study in 2014, and we're going to update it. We're updating it now. So I don't have findings currently, but we will see what happens in the current times. But we did in-depth interviews with 38 clergy who had flourishing mental health and had that on our surveys. And then we took 14 clergy who were burned out, but not necessarily having high levels of depression or anxiety symptoms. So it was mostly work-related burnout where they were going. And not only did we interview them, but bless their hearts, they did daily diaries where they wrote down what they did every hour of every day for a week, and they rated each activity as meaningful, important, um, unpleasant, and pleasant. And they had some short answers that they did at the end of every day of their diary too. And we were able to look at what differentiated clergy who were flourishing from those who were burned out. And not because we asked. We did not say, "Oh, why are you flourishing and why are you burned out?" In fact, when we first did the analysis, our research team didn't even know which participants were in the burnout or flourishing group. But what we did is we asked them how they approached ministry and where were their struggles and where were their joys, and just kind of how they faced a typical day and an atypical day. And what we found is that clergy who are flourishing do four things that clergy who are burned out do not do. And some of these are a little surprising. So one of them is clergy who are flourishing, they are well aware of their health broadly, mind, body, or spirit, and they have some kind of health practice. And I just think this is so smart of them. They make backup plans for when they're not able to do their practice. So like you plan to go golfing in the morning, and then when that doesn't happen, flourishing clergy come up with a backup plan to make it happen because they know that they're going to get interrupted like all the time.
Right.
They also have some boundaries around their time, which makes sense in like the secular world and as a psychologist, but I really wasn't sure. And on the front end, like there is this beautiful thing when your whole life comes together and you just feel like you're swimming in, and you can have all your moments with your congregants whenever they're needed, and that's who you are. But no, don't do that. As a flourishing pastor, you should have some time that is just yours, whether that's time for family dinner, a time that you set aside for friends or calls. Like it is okay to not be interrupted. It might actually be essential. What else did they do? They also approached criticism differently. So clergy with burnout really listened and took in all that criticism and had a hard time getting out of their head. Clergy who were flourishing would hear the criticism and they would ask themselves, is this related to what God is wanting me to do in this time? And if it was related, then they would really pay attention to it. And if it wasn't relevant, somehow they let it go. They did a process and they let it go. And that's really important.
Yeah, I wonder if that has to do with their positive mental health, because the problem solving and self-actualization is one of the ones that Luch notes, and we know that they've added in the hierarchy of needs a seventh, but that we don't need to talk about that. But I wonder if just the confidence of who they are as a person probably plays into that a little bit. I would assume that they can they're not looking for value based upon criticism as much as maybe someone who's already feeling down anyway, and then all the criticism does is confirm what they already knew, that they were failures, right? I mean, that's really kind of the depression issue that goes into there. So yeah, interesting.
That's a really good hypothesis. And let me tell you that we did a behavioral study to attempt to reduce stress symptoms for clergy. And we included testing a particular prayer practice, the daily examine, precisely because of this finding that clergy facing criticism might be able to let it go by turning back to their work with God.
Yeah.
And so the daily examine, it's this Ignatian prayer practice. It comes from the Jesuits. It's 500 years old. A lot of people we're talking to probably know it, and you can look it up. If not, it's on apps, it's on books. You can pray as you go. Like this exists. You can learn it easily. But it's these 5 simple steps that walk you through, like thanking God for the day, thinking about the last 24 hours, and what was one thing good that stood out to you from the last 24 hours. And it's important. It's important that we look for the good things too, just like as you started this conversation with me. By the time you got done interviewing people for 90 minutes about what was good about ministry, like it can change your mindset.
Yeah.
But then you also look for what didn't go well, and you can pray about it. You can ask God for forgiveness if that's warranted, and you can pray for guidance. And so you can kind of close out this prayer of, like, thanking God for the day, and asking for guidance in your next steps on this thing that you prayed about. It's a quick prayer, 10 to 15 minutes. We found clergy did it on average 12 minutes a day. They did it 6 or 7 days a week for 6 months. We wanted that, but like we kind of removed the intervention after 3 months and thought that might be it, but they kept going. And in fact, the intervention was really light. It was like 3 days of 90 minutes of like practicing it with some clergy and an expert person. And this is on, you can do it self-guided with the videos yourself on our website if you want to. And then that was it. And then they came back together one or two more times to talk about it if they wanted to, all on Zoom. And what we found was, compared to a waitlist control group, clergy who also wanted to do a stress reduction intervention, and would get one later, they participants in the daily examine saw substantial increases in positive mental health by 6 months. Also decreases in depression symptoms, decreases in anxiety symptoms, decreases in stress symptoms. We also made them wear these heart rate devices and did heart rate variability. So they had to wear an EKG device for 48 hours at the beginning and 3 months later. And for the daily examine, the heart rate variability was in the direction of improvement. It was not statistically significant. It's hard to get statistical significance with a smaller sample size, and not everyone could wear this heart rate device. But we know for certain that everybody was feeling better. And it being a prayer practice, their spiritual well-being also improved.
Yeah. It's interesting. So one of the things we find, at least in our denomination, is that pastors' devotional time is not good. We encourage everyone to spend time, but we spend time in God's Word, and we spend time in preparing prayers and writing prayers and studying God's Word. But typically is always for somebody else, and to pause and take that time for yourself, and with you and the Lord together is sometimes found very difficult in pastoral and clergy ministry. And so in your studies, how might church members help pastors and church leaders prevent negative mental health and promote positive mental health? Because you're kind of mentioning some of these practices that you've discovered. How can church members help out?
Well, so early on, we found that clergy who reported that their congregants cared about them as a person and not just as clergy, was like cross-sectionally related to all kinds of good outcomes, including positive mental health. And so it's and so ways that church members can show that to their clergy is by not only talking about work. Ask, what are you reading? How's your family doing? Where are you going to go on vacation this year? Like, see them as a whole person. That's really vital. The other thing that is so important is good communication. And we kind of take it for granted that we're all, because everybody's coming together and loves Jesus and wants to be there, that it's all going to go smoothly. And it doesn't. And there are ways, including, we have a couple tools and resources that we've developed to show people, or to hold conversations to make it more likely that communication will go well. So so for example, we've got one program called Pastor and Parish, and this is for in the United Methodist Church, the personnel committee is called the Staff Parish Relations Committee. What do you have something with the Lutherans?
Actually, it's funny. I was just at this conference, and they're trying to create some models that have like these church teams that are really called the Care for the Church Worker Team, and they're not elected. They're appointed typically, usually by the pastor, is what they're encouraging, and then they go through these similar things, I think, but it's very. A Grace Place Wellness is just starting it, and it's very, very. There's a couple different districts that are trying to do some similar things, but nothing that is, I would say, across our synod that is a common practice. So, yeah.
Well, it's great to get a structure that then might be able to have a process and one process that we have one process that we've tested and it goes really well. 100% of the clergy a year later say that they are less stressed, and the committee members feel closer together. And then we have a new process and resource that we are actively looking at in North Carolina now for having hard conversations. So the first one is called Pastor and Parish, and it really grounds. And in fact, I don't know if I can share my screen, but I would be happy to pull a few of these things up to show you.
Wait,
Um,
I think you can. I don't.
I can't yet, but you might be able to give me access. But Pastor and Parish is very it like grounds the committee members in baptism in their work and reminds why are we here and has them head toward a covenant. And it kind of goes over their roles and somewhat how their roles affect the pastor. For example, there's an emphasis on like you actually have to tell the pastor your church's history, including the difficult parts, because if you don't tell them the difficult parts, they're not going to know and they're going to make some kind of misstep and everybody's going to be unhappy. Um, and so we really recommend this. And like you can go through this process, even if your church probably if you're having a little bit of discord right now, you can probably still do this process. If you're really going through a lot of conflict, well, then you probably need an expert in conflict. And then, okay, so here, let me just share. Hold on. Are you seeing? Yes. Okay.
I
So,
see your
so
screen.
right. So if you were to just search for Clergy Health Initiative, then what would come up is you would come to the Duke Clergy Health Initiative, and we've got resources for clergy and for congregations. So earlier today, I was talking about um, some of our stress management practices, like the daily examine. Also, we had great outcomes for mindfulness-based stress reduction, and clergy will do it. So you can see that there. Mental health support. And then when I was talking about the four things that clergy with positive mental health do, that clergy with burnout don't do, you can find it here. And I recently wrote up the practices that we're recommending, and you can see videos on how to learn how to do them, and you can find out why, like how much the time commitment is and what is the evidence base behind it. So we recommend loving kindness meditation, a certain kind of breath work. The randomized controlled trial came out just at a year ago, and it has fantastic outcomes, including better positive mood, so relevant to you and your work.
Mhm.
Um, and so here's the daily exam and prayer practice. If you want to come and find your self-guided retreat, it's here. And then we are also recommending expressive writing, and the handouts are here.
Great.
But what I was telling you about is if you go under resources for congregations, so the one that we started 10 years ago is Pastor and Parish. The one that we are working on right now is called Keeping the Faith: Conversations to Strengthen the Bond Between Pastors and Church Leaders. And anyone can access this. And hold on one second, where I make everybody dizzy.
Uh,
Um, that what with this, we offer a structure for 6 conversations. And we don't say how long any conversation will take because, a conversation is exactly that. It's like bringing everybody's viewpoints together and trying to understand each other. And for this, you work on your covenant first of how you are going to be in relationship with each other. But after the covenant, you pick which conversation you want. You don't have to go in order. You can just do one if you want. We have one on differences in worldview, which includes like politics and other forms of worldview. Um, the importance of connection. This is like social support and has some of those things we were talking about how congregants can show that they care to their pastor. And for each of them, we show our data. So we're linking the clergy data to why have this conversation. So for example, and we take on, for example, like the number of hours that clergy are expected to work and the number of hours that clergy actually work. So you can take on that myth that pastors just show up for 2 hours on Sundays. Like there's so much more. So if we were to and at the end of each conversation, this is the covenant, but at the end of each so here's the feeling loved and cared for. Most clergy do feel loved and cared for. It's a problem if you don't. We cover what are the burnout rates, things that I think congregants need to hear because it may never occur to them that their pastor can be burned out
mhm.
or having anxiety. And then the congregation has questions for themselves.
Nice.
Are we comfortable recognizing the humanity of our pastor? And in what ways do we allow our pastor to be simply human? And meanwhile, the pastor has questions. You know, what expectations do I carry? And have I stated them? And then we have specific recommendations. And so anyway, this repeats
That's a great tool.
for the 6 ones, but I hope that people will use it because if you want to shore up, we can't just expect clergy to shore themselves up.
Well, I told you, you guys were, a decade ahead of the game with what you're doing. You're kind of leading the way, I think, and so that's really good because one of the things you mentioned was, genuine care, and that really helps with pro-social attitude, and that is just and it's really, I try to tell people all the time that pastors and clergy aren't very difficult. It doesn't take a lot. It really doesn't. And so, but that intentionality, and you mentioned job expectations. You don't realize that you've not done what someone expected you until you don't do it. And then then they realize that there was an expectation, and so it's one of those things. And then you have expectations of yourself as a clergy member that really are unrealistic often. And then you mentioned the work life balance. It's funny because there's a lot of new work in our synod right now to create contracts when for call documents when they do call a church worker, a pastor, especially a pastor, that does specifically give them 2 days off a week, which most call documents don't even talk about a day off. And so maybe one day in some of them. And so they're recognizing this great need, and they just added with our Concordia health plans, and instead of 6 free sessions for a counseling, 8 free sessions per incident, per issue. So not just 8 free sessions like, hey, I'm dealing with this, and a year later I'm dealing with this whole new set of 8 sessions. So really trying to be a little more proactive in that. And so I love that tool. And so I'm going to put on the comment section the website to the Duke Clergy Health Initiative, because a lot of good work there, a lot of great free resources. And it's one of those things where sometimes denominations don't work real well together. But I think we can still learn from each other, and we all have the same goal to create. First of all, we want to make much of Jesus. We want the kingdom of heaven to be full, and we want our pastors and church leaders to be healthy and flourish, and so they can do those previous things that I just mentioned. And so, is there anything else that you've been discovering that you haven't shared yet that helps with long-term pastor well-being and longevity?
Oh my gosh. Well, there are so many things. I I I would go back to sleep, physical activity, giving yourself permission to care for yourself and have some time every day. We hear clergy like going away on their day off somewhere where they can't run into congregants, that can be a good thing. Um, you're the only one who can notice when your mental health is tipping toward burnout. And so doing something quickly when you notice that, whether that's allowing yourself more sleep and exercise, or whether that's doing a prayer practice like the daily examine, or doing some mindfulness based stress reduction, which we learned clergy really will do. And on that one, we saw statistically significant improvements in heart rate variability, like a 16% improvement, which is really large, or maybe 14%, which is still really large. And that's the heart rate variability is your heart's ability to return to normal after a stressful event. And if you can't do that, that's what leads to heart attacks and heart events. And so it's some relaxation, non-judgmental, is really important. I see some churches giving fifth Sundays off and trying to establish a rhythm of rest in the whole congregation. I think that's a great idea. If you have something really stressful going on and you can't get it out of your mind, ruminating, it turns out I'm a good ruminator, and it turns out that that's not good for us, that it doesn't actually work. I think I'm solving problems in my head, but you're not if you're like just thinking about it all the time. And so expressive writing, which you can find on our website and has a 25-year excellent history of studies, is a great way of you just write for 20 minutes, 3 days in a row, and it's as good as expensive therapy. So I definitely recommend that. That's a lot of recommendations to throw out there. I suppose the real thing is to like be kind to yourself, like realize that you are working under sometimes extraordinary circumstances. But, and what I think is really unique about clergy is that they provide care to the exact same people who will turn around and criticize them. Like social workers don't have that, psychologists don't have that, at least not that they'll publicly criticize them. So it is extraordinary, and be patient with yourself and just pick one of these to do. Um, and I sometimes, if I find myself working late at night, I ask myself, like, um, why am I doing this? Like, and if I'm tired, I just tell myself I need to go to bed. And so if I could give your listeners permission after they've put in a full day to go to bed and leave the rest to God, I I would encourage that.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. Even what you were showing on your screen, how do congregations feel about letting the pastor be human? And that's really interesting because pastors feel like they can't really be human sometimes, and because vulnerability is frowned upon often. In fact, when I do these seminars and conferences, I find this is just an observation. Again, you're the researcher, and so I love talking to someone like you because our research is a totally different. I'm very more qualitative. How do people feel? And you're like, I'm looking at numbers here, and so let's take percentage. I appreciate we need both, but I find that the resistance to the conversations like we're having with a certain age demographic is really phenomenal. It takes a lot for a certain demographic, especially I would just say, I found usually about the 45, 50 or above who have been in ministry for many years struggle with thinking about some of this stuff because they've either suppressed it or they've switched churches because they get, that's what happens sometimes in denominations. They get burnt out at a church, so they think if I just go to a different church, that'll fix it. Only to find that those problems continue to come up. I know several pastors that I've worked with that because they've never dealt with it. It just comes up again. And so, but then you have, again, I think COVID helped this too with awareness. And then you have younger people who really are open and more aware of mental health and the conversation. I was in a denomination, well, let's see how many years ago, 9, 10 years ago. Well, I was in that denomination for 20 years, and they just flat out said that psychology was bad. And so you had pastors like myself counseling people, and there were times I'm like this. I said I can't help you. I don't have the tools. The word of God's great, but there's some stuff that the natural body and the science can fix because we've studied it. And I would always take heat from my senior pastor because I'm like, I need to send these people to someone professional because I can't do it. Yeah, in fact, I shared it, I think, in one of my podcasts. I had this one couple who was doing marriage counseling. I pretty much tell marriages, you get me for 4 times. And after that, I can't really help you because it's
Mhm.
beyond just, hey, consider the needs of others above yourself, pursue Christ above, that relation. Don't look to them
Yeah.
to be Jesus and things like that. And I had this one couple, it was her third marriage, his second marriage. And he says to me, he says, she tried to shoot her last husband. And she goes, well, only after he tried to light me on fire. And so that's when I realized, you know what? I think I need to refer you to somebody.
Wow.
There are issues here that and so I think again for pastors also to know their lane and where to stay in is really important. But I have so many stories, but we won't go into those. Well, is there any other final thing you'd like to share? Because I know that you're doing so much work and you're excited about it, and I love your website. I've used it often, and there's so many tools and resources. You could spend a long time just diving into all of that. But is there any last thoughts you'd like to share?
As we do this, like I think it's also important to go earlier and earlier. And so my colleague David Eagle and Aaron Johnston and Anna Holloman and others are studying seminary students. And so we're starting to learn more about how seminary students do want to be caring for themselves, and that gets really hard to do in the school setting. And so then care for themselves gets disrupted for 3 years of seminary, and then they move into a pastorate and are expecting kind of long term to be able to go back to healthy habits at a time when they're new to it and all kinds of expectations on them, and it gets hard. So that team is going to be looking for ways and suggestions and trying to figure out where for the United Methodists the when do the physical health problems start. And so I would just say stay tuned. And if you work with a seminary, like my dream would be to have some patterns that allow for students to care for mind, body, and spirit during the day to work, like something structural, like having a lunch hour where there's never classes and people start walking groups together. And it could be a time for both camaraderie and social support and the physical activity, and maybe even getting outside and somewhere where nature is good for us. Like I think that there are ways we can be doing better earlier on.
Yeah. It's always fascinating to me. None of the recommendations or the results that you're finding, um, none of them seem, well, I don't know what the word like too unusual. Most of it's like, well, yeah, that makes sense. We should get out and walk. We should eat healthier. We should, and so. But I think what the factor that's surprising is that clergy should know how important this is, and we're finding that they really either they know or and but they just don't find a way to make it happen. And that's where I say that the church leaders and the lay leaders of the church need to make sure that this is important, that their pastor take care of themselves. And sometimes that pastor needs accountability. One pastor was telling me that he used to go, one of his pastorates, he would go to the YMCA to work out, and there was one church member always there when at the same time, and if he didn't go, the church member would say, "Didn't see you at the Y this week." And then if he did go, he goes, "Good to see you at the Y this week." And so that was kind of his thing, going, I know if I don't go, I'm going to hear from this guy that I wasn't there. But even things like that and that relationship is really important. So Regine, I just meant I can't thank you enough. I consider you, and I could be wrong, and that's fine, to be probably your work and what you do to be probably the leading work on clergy health in the United States. I just really appreciate what you do. Those who are clergy or even lay leaders who haven't read Faithful and Fractured, easy to read. Sometimes when you have people as smart as you writing books, you're like, oh man, am I going to be able to understand this? And what I like about it, with Jason Biasi in there, you really have a good complement of practical, along with the research and the statistics, and again, just fantastic book. And so also, I'll put again the contact information for the Duke Clergy Health Initiative, so you can go check it out, because I think it's really important that you do. And what Regine's doing, and so many others, is that what we're desiring is that the body of Christ would work together to build one another up in love, so that the church would flourish. And so again, thank you so much, Regine. God bless you. And in what you continue to do, I know I'm going to use it continually as a resource for my work and also my personal life. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I just have to say the reason why I've been able to do all of this work and have it inform other denominations and be a leader is all because of the Duke Endowment. If they had not funded us continuously for 17 years, we wouldn't be able to do it. And it's been great having a lot of good clergy walk alongside of us, including on our team. And like all these tools are developed by pastors themselves, like the Reverend Jesse Larkins and others. So I'm so glad that we can share them. I hope that they help someone. Let me know if it does.
I will do that for sure. Thank you.